The year 2008 brought the global financial system to its absolute knees, leaving millions completely stripped of their homes and livelihoods overnight. Then came the unprecedented, terrifying global standstill of 2020, shattering supply chains and plunging the world into extreme uncertainty once again. Now, the dark, looming shadow of yet another severe recession hangs heavily over us, whispering ominous threats of a devastating economic collapse. Whenever the world spirals into this kind of absolute chaos, a very specific narrative immediately begins to echo through our collective consciousness. People quickly stop looking at the failing markets and start pointing angry fingers at the shadows, whispering that all of this was perfectly orchestrated. The burning question is why, in the face of every single global catastrophe, do we immediately assume it is part of a grand design? It is incredibly tempting to deeply believe that a shadowy group of elites is sitting in a boardroom somewhere, pulling the strings of the global economy. After all, accepting that the intricate financial systems we rely on are simply fragile and prone to spectacular failure is a terrifying reality to face. But we must seriously ask ourselves if there truly is a hidden hand orchestrating our downfall, or if this is just a psychological coping mechanism. Are we actually helpless pawns in a meticulously crafted game of wealth transfer? Or are we simply victims of our own fundamental human psychology? This exact phenomenon of blaming an invisible architect during times of intense hardship is not a new trend born from the internet age. It is a deeply ingrained, historical instinct that rapidly surfaces every time the ground beneath our financial stability begins to violently shake. To truly understand the reality behind the collapse, we have to peel back the heavy layers of fear and look at the actual anatomy of a crisis. We critically need to explore the dark corners of both human history and human psychology to see why the mind so desperately craves a conspiracy. Only then can we effectively separate the genuine, structural, systemic flaws from the comforting illusions we tell ourselves when everything goes horribly wrong. If we look back carefully through the vast annals of history, we will quickly see that this exact same pattern repeats itself with startling consistency. During the devastating financial panic of 1900, rumors aggressively swirled that a few massive financiers had purposefully squeezed the money supply to ruin their smaller competitors. It was widely believed that powerful titans of industry intentionally crashed the markets just to consolidate their own untouchable banking monopolies. Fast forward to the devastating depths of the Great Depression in the 1930s, and society was absolutely rife with accusations of intentional system manipulation. Citizens who had lost everything firmly believed that a cabal of international bankers had artificially crashed the stock market to buy up the nation's assets for pennies. Then came the crippling inflation crisis of the 1970s, where ordinary people were convinced that oil barons and shadow governments were artificially manipulating the global energy supply. The narrative was never about complex geopolitical tensions or broken monetary policy. It was always framed as a deliberate, organized attack on the working class. When the spectacular dot-com bubble violently burst in the early 2000s, completely wiping out trillions in wealth, the blame shifted towards manipulative venture capitalists. The public was absolutely certain that tech elites had pumped up worthless companies intentionally, leaving average retail investors holding an empty, burning bag. During the catastrophic financial crash of 2008, the dominant narrative quickly shifted from reckless, systemic lending practices to a deliberate game played by banking elites. The public became fiercely convinced that Wall Street insiders had engineered the subprime mortgage crisis purely to absorb the generational wealth of the middle class. Then we experienced the intense isolation and severe economic deep freeze of the 2020 pandemic, and an entirely new, yet eerily similar, story rapidly emerged. Suddenly, the entire globe was totally captivated by the viral idea of a Great Reset, a theory suggesting the virus was merely a tool for complete economic restructuring. Millions deeply believed that powerful figures were using the unprecedented global health emergency to intentionally wipe out small businesses and centralize absolute societal control. Every single time a massive, life-altering crisis strikes, society instinctively bypasses logical systemic analysis and heads straight for the theory of a mastermind. It simply does not matter if the trigger is a massive housing bubble, an unexpected viral outbreak, or a sudden, catastrophic collapse in global trade. The immediate, reflexive reaction of the masses is always to frantically search for the hidden string puller who stands to secretly benefit from the misery. This deeply entrenched, historical reaction begs a very important, critical question regarding our collective behavior and our perception of major global events. Why is this specific pattern of blame so incredibly consistent across vastly different generations, wildly different technologies, and entirely different types of crises? The answer does not necessarily lie in the secretive, evil actions of the ultra-rich, but rather inside the intricate, biological wiring of our own minds. To truly comprehend this fascinating phenomenon, we must dive deep into the fascinating evolutionary psychology of the human brain. Our brains are fundamentally, beautifully designed as highly sophisticated, non-stop pattern-seeking machines that constantly scan our environment for potential threats. This powerful evolutionary trait kept our ancient ancestors alive by helping them instantly recognize the subtle signs of a hidden predator moving in the tall grass. However, in the hyper-connected modern world, this exact same biological hardwiring makes us incredibly uncomfortable with sheer randomness and chaotic, unprecedented events. The human mind absolutely despises the terrifying idea that massive, catastrophic events can simply happen without a clear, conscious intention behind them. We vastly, instinctively prefer to believe that someone, somewhere, is firmly in control of the terrifying situation, even if their intentions are entirely malicious and evil. Believing in a sinister global conspiracy provides a strange, twisted sense of psychological comfort because it implies that there is a defined structure to the madness. If there is a powerful mastermind flawlessly orchestrating the crisis, then the world is not just a random, chaotic void where terrible things happen for no reason. The alternative, realistic explanation is that our global economic system is so unbelievably complex that nobody is truly at the steering wheel anymore. It means that millions of disconnected, highly volatile variables can simply align in the worst possible way, causing the entire global structure to spontaneously collapse. For the average person, the horrifying thought of living in a world completely devoid of control is far more terrifying than the existence of an evil cabal. A physical villain or a secret organization can theoretically be exposed, fought against in the streets, or eventually overthrown by a united, angry public. But you absolutely cannot physically fight against the cold, unfeeling mathematics of a naturally decaying economic cycle or an unpredictable black swan event. This desperate, burning need for control is heavily compounded by a very powerful psychological force known in behavioral science as confirmation bias. When people are deeply afraid, highly stressed, and financially vulnerable, their brains actively filter out any logical information that contradicts their deepest, darkest fears. If you inherently suspect that a group of elites is secretly planning to crash the housing market, you will suddenly see evidence of this plot everywhere you look. Every vague news headline, every minor government policy change, and every out-of-context quote from a billionaire becomes an undeniable, glowing piece of the grand puzzle. Your heavily biased brain neatly ignores the boring, highly complex economic indicators and exclusively highlights the dramatic, terrifying narratives that perfectly validate your anxiety. We naturally, flawlessly construct a reality that perfectly aligns with our inner paranoia, transforming regular systemic failures into intentional acts of war. We start connecting entirely invisible dots, turning mere statistical coincidences into undeniable proof of a coordinated, highly malicious agenda against the common man. This specific psychological vulnerability is exactly what modern social media platforms and digital algorithms exploit with absolutely ruthless, cold efficiency. We are no longer just dealing with the natural, inherent biases of the flawed human brain. We are actively battling advanced technology designed to amplify them entirely. The complex algorithms that power our daily digital information diet are specifically engineered to maximize user engagement. And nothing drives engagement quite like outrage. A meticulously researched, 3-hour academic documentary carefully explaining the boring nuances of inflation and monetary policy will always struggle to find an audience. However, a heavily edited, fast-paced, 10-minute video aggressively claiming that a secret society is actively stealing your generational wealth will spread like absolute wildfire. These highly dramatic narratives of total global manipulation are inherently viral because they directly trigger our deepest survival instincts and our sense of righteous, burning anger. The modern media landscape effectively creates a massive, impenetrable digital echo chamber where the most extreme, conspiratorial economic theories are presented as undeniable facts. As people share these terrifying videos, the algorithm takes note, relentlessly feeding them even more radical content until their entire worldview is completely consumed by the grand plan. Furthermore, this intense, rapid spread of paranoia is heavily fueled by the very real and rapidly growing wealth inequality deeply embedded in our society. It is not exactly a well-kept secret that during major economic downturns, the working class loses their livelihoods, while billionaires often manage to multiply their net worth. When regular, hard-working people see massive corporations getting billion-dollar government bailouts, while small, local businesses are cruelly forced into bankruptcy, suspicion naturally fell. This glaring, painful disparity in how the financial system treats vastly different classes creates an incredibly fertile ground for the grand plan narrative to permanently take root. It feels entirely logical and completely justified to assume that a system this blatantly unfair must have been rigged from the very beginning by those who sit at the top. As the general public's trust in traditional institutions, government bodies, and mainstream media organizations continues to plummet to all-time historical lows, the allure of alternative theories skyrockets. The higher the level of deep distrust in the official, mainstream narrative, the stronger and more wildly elaborate the theories of a grand design become. People feel entirely abandoned and deeply betrayed by the very systems that were originally supposed to protect them, leading them to find absolute certainty in the darkest corners of the internet. They begin to aggressively view every sudden dip in the stock market, every minor shift in interest rates, or every new banking regulation as a deliberate, targeted attack. They conveniently forget that the global financial system itself is incredibly bloated, highly experimental, heavily leveraged, and highly prone to breaking under its own immense weight. But when we finally force ourselves to step back from the emotional manipulation and the viral internet narratives, we must confront the harsh reality of global economics. The absolute undeniable truth is often much more mundane, yet infinitely more complex, than the thrilling Hollywood tales of secret societies controlling the world's wealth. The global economy is an incredibly vast, intricate, and deeply fragile web of interconnected systems that involves billions of chaotic daily decisions made by ordinary people. It is a massive, living, breathing mechanism that naturally experiences intense periods of rapid, euphoric expansion, followed by incredibly painful, devastating periods of contraction. These repeating cycles of economic boom and bust are an entirely natural, unavoidable, and deeply historical feature of human civilization and market dynamics. Severe, world-altering crises almost never stem from a single, villainous mastermind pushing a secret red button in a hidden, heavily guarded underground bunker. Instead, they are usually the explosive, tragic result of a deadly combination of systemic vulnerabilities that build up silently and slowly over many decades of mismanagement. Massive, unprecedented accumulations of corporate and personal debt eventually reach a terrifying tipping point where the heavy burden becomes completely unsustainable for the global market to bear. Rampant, unchecked speculation in highly leveraged assets, whether it is commercial real estate or experimental digital currencies, creates enormous bubbles that are mathematically destined to burst. Misguided, highly experimental monetary policies routinely enacted by central banks, often done with genuinely good intentions to stimulate growth, can accidentally warp market incentives forever. These policies frequently create massive structural instability by artificially suppressing interest rates and flooding the complex market with heavily devalued fiat currency. Add in highly unpredictable geopolitical conflicts, sudden global supply chain disruptions, and entirely unexpected societal shocks, and you have a perfect, devastating recipe for absolute financial disaster. It is a completely chaotic collision of millions of rapidly moving parts, none of which are fully understood or truly controlled by any single entity or organization. We must explicitly and logically understand that immense, overwhelming systemic complexity does not automatically equal a coordinated, highly structured global conspiracy. Just because a global economic system is incredibly difficult for the average person to comprehend does not mean it is secretly being steered by a malicious shadow government. It is undeniably true that the incredibly wealthy and institutionally powerful definitely use these systemic crises to their absolute, ruthless financial advantage. They actively and aggressively leverage their massive capital resources and exclusive insider knowledge to buy up distressed assets and vital infrastructure at rock-bottom prices. However, ruthlessly capitalizing on a devastating financial disaster after it happens is fundamentally and logically different from intentionally engineering the disaster in the first place. Financial opportunism is a very real, aggressive, and often cruel force in the ruthless financial world, but attributing godlike foresight and total global control to a select few is absurd. It is absolutely crucial to deeply recognize that the elite investors who consistently survive these massive crashes are usually just significantly better positioned to weather the storm. They are not necessarily the magical, evil wizards who successfully summoned the devastating hurricane. They just happen to own the strongest, most resilient concrete bunkers. They deeply understand the harsh, historical, and repeating cycles of the market, maintain incredibly large reserves of liquid capital, and simply wait for the inevitable moment when the fragile system breaks. They coldly study the mechanics of past depressions, and use that clinical, historical data to distance themselves entirely from the highly emotional panic of the retail market. This vital realization brings us to a profound, deeply personal reflection on how we individually choose to navigate a world that feels increasingly hostile and wildly unpredictable. we must seriously and honestly question why we spend so much of our precious mental energy obsessing over who might be secretly ruling the world from the shadows. Why are we so deeply, unhealthily fixated on unmasking the invisible, hypothetical architects of our economic misery, while completely ignoring the practical things we can actually control? Spending endless hours going down toxic digital rabbit holes to uncover a grand conspiracy does absolutely nothing to practically protect your family from rapidly rising inflation. Knowing the supposed, highly debated leaked names of the elites orchestrating a massive market crash will absolutely not pay your rent or mortgage when the economy inevitably takes a steep downturn. We have to violently and consciously shift our collective focus entirely away from the paralyzing fear of a rigged system and toward the empowering pursuit of personal financial resilience. In a rapidly shifting, volatile world defined by constant, terrifying financial turbulence, possessing highly adaptable, high-income skills is infinitely more valuable than possessing an elaborate internet theory. The practical ability to pivot your career, master complex, new digital tools, and create entirely independent sources of immense value will shield you far better than any online conspiracy forum ever could. Developing strong, foundational financial literacy, truly understanding how fiat currency actually flows, and learning to aggressively protect your personal assets are the true, tested weapons against economic uncertainty. You absolutely cannot directly control the complex, overarching macroeconomic forces that relentlessly cause inflation, but you can entirely control how you invest your capital and grow your personal expertise. True, lasting financial security does not come from waiting passively and hopelessly for a deeply corrupt global financial system to suddenly become fair, balanced, and fully transparent. It strictly comes from actively and aggressively building a highly resilient mindset that is deeply rooted in extreme adaptability and a relentless daily dedication to mastering your own chosen craft. Maintaining absolute mental clarity in the face of a chaotic, violently collapsing market is a massive, unfair competitive advantage that permanently separates those who survive from those who are entirely wiped out. Paranoia simply drains your vital creative energy and completely blinds you to the very real, highly lucrative opportunities that always present themselves during periods of intense economic disruption. When the deeply fearful masses are completely paralyzed by the looming threat of an evil grand plan, the highly prepared individual is calmly, quietly analyzing the changing landscape. They are aggressively making strategic, highly calculated financial moves, while everyone else is busy furiously screaming at the invisible, terrifying shadows on the digital wall. Financial history mathematically proves over and over again that the greatest, most massive transfers of generational wealth always happen during the absolute darkest economic times. This incredible phenomenon does not happen because of a secret, elite global plot, but simply because of drastically differing levels of individual preparedness and extreme emotional control. Those who truly understand the natural, brutal, and historical mechanics of a market bust cycle do not blindly panic when their portfolio numbers suddenly turn bright red. They simply, and incredibly coldly, execute the long-term, calculated financial strategies they carefully and quietly built during the highly optimistic, euphoric boom years. The highly interconnected modern world is undeniably changing at an incredibly rapid, terrifying pace, and traditional financial systems are currently facing completely unprecedented, historical stress tests. The foundational architecture of money itself is rapidly evolving, and the comfortable financial stability we once took for absolute granted is actively, visibly crumbling before our very eyes. But the collective, via fear, and escalating, toxic paranoia we generate in response to these rapid global changes are often far more destructive than the actual economic shifts themselves. We must completely stop voluntarily giving away our precious mental sovereignty to the terrifying, highly dramatized ghosts of a hypothetical, all-powerful grand design. Allowing the constant, terrifying fear of a fully controlled global collapse to completely dictate your daily actions is the ultimate, tragic surrender of your own personal agency and future potential. It is entirely time to aggressively reclaim our power, focus strictly on the highly tangible reality of our own unique capabilities, and build an absolutely unshakable financial foundation. The sprawling global economic system may indeed be incredibly flawed, surprisingly fragile, highly leveraged, and deeply unfair to the average hardworking citizen. But your ultimate, individual ability to navigate it successfully, adapt to its violent and sudden swings, and entirely secure your own future is completely in your own hands. Do not ever let the highly alluring, deeply viral internet narratives of an avoidable global doom trick you into comfortably accepting the pathetic role of a helpless, passive victim. Stay entirely and sharply focused on practical reality. Continuously and aggressively upgrade your high-income skills, and completely refuse to let the deafening noise of public panic dictate your financial future. Deliberately cultivate a resilient mindset that actively looks at a violently collapsing market, not as the tragic end of the world, but as a complex, solvable puzzle that requires a calm, highly strategic solution. The powerful, shadowy elites you fear so deeply do not hold a magical, exclusive monopoly on critical thinking, deep market research, or highly disciplined emotional control. You possess the exact same innate intellectual capacity to carefully analyze the historical market trends, aggressively protect your hard-earned capital, and position yourself perfectly to thrive in the chaotic aftermath of the storm. Deeply understand that the terrifying chaos you constantly see heavily amplified on the evening news is usually just the chaotic, painful friction of a massive, outdated system trying to rapidly recalibrate itself. When the very next major financial crash inevitably arrives, and the entire internet is completely flooded once again with terrifying, highly viral tales of the ultimate global grand plan, stop and take a deep breath. Consciously and critically recognize the overwhelming, terrifying noise for exactly what it truly is. The collective, highly contagious psychological panic of a society that has temporarily lost its anchor to reality. This collective hysteria is merely a symptom of a population that has completely forgotten how to analyze complex data without defaulting to the most terrifying narrative available. The urge to believe in a perfectly evil conspiracy is fundamentally an act of intellectual laziness, allowing us to completely surrender the difficult task of understanding intricate, boring market dynamics. By choosing to believe that everything is entirely predetermined by a secret group of global puppeteers, you are giving yourself a free pass to completely stop trying to improve your own situation. It is the ultimate psychological excuse for personal financial failure, completely absolving you of the heavy responsibility to aggressively manage your own wealth and deeply understand the mechanics of money. Reject this comforting, toxic illusion with every fiber of your being, and deliberately choose this significantly harder, yet infinitely more rewarding, path of radical personal accountability and relentless financial education. Become completely obsessed with fundamentally understanding how capital actually flows through the global system, how immense debt cycles operate, and exactly how major value is created during times of extreme crisis. The deeply complex world of finance is absolutely not a highly exclusive, locked fortress entirely reserved for secretive billionaires smoking expensive cigars in hidden, underground boardrooms. It is an openly readable, deeply historical map of human behavioral psychology, mass market sentiment, and entirely predictable cycles of collective greed and overwhelming fear. Once you finally learn how to properly and coldly read this historical map, the terrifying illusion of a magical, highly coordinated grand plan completely and utterly shatters into a million pieces. You will begin to clearly see the global economy not as a tightly controlled, highly malicious machine, but as a wild, deeply chaotic ocean that you must learn how to skillfully navigate. A highly skilled sailor does not waste their precious energy screaming in terror at the raging storm or blaming an evil sea gods for the massive, crashing waves. They calmly and precisely adjust their sails, batten down the hatches, and completely rely on their years of intense training to ride out the terrifying violence of the ocean. This exact same principle applies directly to the complex, modern financial markets during a period of massive, historical crisis and unprecedented systemic collapse. Do not waste your valuable time angrily pointing fingers at the shadowy figures allegedly creating the economic storm. Focus entirely on forcefully steering your own financial ship through the dangerous, crashing waves. Build emergency reserves, aggressively diversify your skill sets, intensely study emerging, disruptive technologies, and completely refuse to participate in the highly contagious, emotional panic selling of the misinformed retail the ultimate form of powerful, lasting rebellion against a deeply flawed, highly rigged financial system is not endlessly complaining about it on internet forums. The truest, most powerful rebellion is becoming so incredibly capable, so deeply financially literate, and so highly adaptable that the massive systemic crashes completely fail to destroy you. It is entirely about deliberately transforming yourself into an individual who can consistently generate massive value and protect their wealth. Entirely, regardless of what the broader macroeconomic environment is doing. The world will absolutely continue to experience massive, terrifying cycles of extreme prosperity and devastating structural collapse. This is the entirely undeniable, historical rhythm of human civilization. There will always be another terrifying recession, another totally unexpected global crisis, and inevitably, another highly convincing narrative claiming that it was all meticulously planned from the very start. But you absolutely do not have to blindly buy into the comforting, terrifying illusion that you are merely a helpless, insignificant pawn in someone else's evil, masterful game. You possess the incredible, undeniable power to completely change your relationship with economic chaos, transforming absolute fear into cold, calculated, and highly strategic action. Step entirely and permanently away from the intoxicating, highly addictive allure of the collective victim mentality, and step boldly, aggressively into the truly empowering role of the active, brilliant financial strategist. Because at the end of the very long, deeply chaotic day, the absolute only true, undeniable architect of your personal survival, long-term wealth, and lasting success is you. The financial markets may crash, global currencies may wildly inflate, and powerful, historical institutions may entirely crumble into dust beneath the immense weight of their own systemic corruption. However, the deeply ingrained high-income skills you build, the profound financial knowledge you accumulate, and the cold emotional resilience you forge can absolutely never be taken away by any grand plan. These completely intangible, incredibly powerful internal assets are the absolute true wealth that completely survives every single economic depression and market collapse in human history. So the very next time the global alarm bells inevitably start ringing and the terrified masses start wildly shouting about a highly coordinated global reset, simply smile. Smile deeply, because you truly understand the hidden, psychological mechanics of their overwhelming panic, and you absolutely know exactly what you need to do to survive and thrive. You are no longer entirely blinded by the highly dramatic, terrifying internet noise. You are completely, coldly focused on clearly executing your own personal, highly strategic financial plan. The so-called evil elites can continue playing their massive, highly leveraged macroeconomic games at the absolute top of the fragile, teetering financial pyramid. You will be far too incredibly busy building your own unshakable, deeply protected financial fortress firmly on the solid ground to ever truly care. Let the deeply misinformed, terrified masses endlessly debate the wildly elaborate, highly unprovable conspiracy theories while they slowly lose everything they own to the merciless, grinding cycle of inflation. You will be out there aggressively studying the historical market cycles, carefully positioning your capital, and boldly taking advantage of the massive, unique opportunities that only appear during maximum chaos. The ultimate absolute truth is that the global economy is far too massively chaotic, far too incredibly complex, and far too deeply human to ever be perfectly, flawlessly controlled. The real, terrifying danger is not some hidden, omnipotent secret society brilliantly pulling the global strings, but your own deeply ingrained psychological willingness to entirely surrender to collective panic. Reclaim your mental sovereignty today. Aggressively sharpen your critical thinking skills, and completely refuse to be a helpless, terrified victim of the highly predictable, historical economic cycle. Master the fundamental rules of the complex financial game, completely transcend the highly emotional, paralyzing fear, and aggressively write your own deeply successful narrative. Your ultimate financial destiny is not quietly written in some secret, smoke-filled boardroom by a cabal of untouchable billionaires planning the demise of the global middle class. It is being actively, aggressively written right now, in this exact moment, by every single financial decision, disciplined habit, and highly strategic risk you choose to take. The terrifying economic storm is absolutely coming, and it will undeniably wash away all those who built their financial houses purely on the highly unstable, emotional sands of panic and viral conspiracy. But for the truly prepared, the incredibly disciplined, and the highly educated, the coming storm is merely the violent, chaotic beginning of an incredibly lucrative new chapter. Will you cower in total fear, desperately blaming the invisible shadows for your sudden, tragic downfall when the financial system inevitably fractures? Or will you boldly and confidently rise as the highly skilled, cold-blooded architect of your own unshakable, deeply resilient financial empire? The ultimate choice is completely, entirely yours to make, and it demands absolute, unwavering commitment to the brutal, unglamorous reality of deeply understanding the world. The world is changing rapidly, violently, and permanently, but your unyielding, fierce adaptability will always remain your most devastatingly powerful, ultimate advantage. Fear the incredibly paralyzing, contagious paranoia of the masses, infinitely more than you ever fear the so-called grand, evil designs of the ultra. Because extreme, focused preparation, cold financial knowledge, and completely unshakable mental clarity are the ultimate, absolute rebellion against any crisis. The true grand plan is not a secret agenda executed by a shadow government, but the highly predictable, deeply human cycle of fear, greed, and eventual systemic correction. Embrace this historical truth, absolutely master your own emotional responses, and completely insulate yourself from the highly toxic, paralyzing noise of the frightened mass. As the dust inevitably settles, and the global economy slowly begins to rebuild itself from the ashes, you will be standing tall, entirely untouched by the devastating financial wreckage. You will finally realize that the ultimate power was never hidden away in the shadows. It was always waiting quietly inside your own brilliant, unshakable mind.